The rain fell softly, as if the sky itself wept for someone who had left without saying goodbye. Claudio stood at the edge of the lake where they used to walk on Sundays, his gaze lost in the mist that blurred the horizon. In his hand, he held a yellowed sheet of paper, already smudged by the stubborn drops that insisted on erasing the words. But he didn't need to read it anymore. He knew every line by heart. It was Cecilia's last letter, or at least he believed it was. "Don't cry for me. I have to go. I don't want you to see me waste away. Remember me whole, alive, free." Her handwriting was unmistakable. Round, feminine, full of loops like the things she never said directly. Cecília had a habit of hiding truths between the lines. Even in her goodbye, there was a riddle. But Claudio could no longer solve it. Her death was never officially recorded. There was no funeral, no body, just a brutal absence and the promise of a terminal illness she never named. A childhood friend, Clarissa, was the only one to confirm the story in the letter. She said Cecília had traveled in secret to get treatment, said she didn't want to be remembered by the pain, said she passed peacefully. Claudio tried to believe. He really did. But something didn't add up. Something screamed in the nights when he woke up with her name on his lips and a hollow in his chest that not even the absence of his parents, nor the loss of his job, nor the other women who tried to care for him could fill. He had loved her with a kind of intensity that scared even himself. A sick love, some would say. Obsessive. But it was all he knew. She was the thread that stitched together every loose piece of his soul. From the day they met in that photography class, when Cecília accidentally dropped Claudio's camera and nervously laughed, saying, "Well, now you have a reason to remember me," he never forgot. And now, she was just a memory. A fragmented echo of framed smiles, archived messages, and letters he wrote to no one. Letters that never got an answer. Until one day, it was Clarissa who came to him. She appeared out of nowhere at his grandmother's house, where Claudio had isolated himself since the news of Cecília's death. She looked different. Heavy makeup, sunken eyes, dyed red hair. But there was something more. Anxiety. She barely sat down. Said she had something of Cecília's to return. Pulled from her purse a brown envelope. No sender, no postmark. Inside was an old photo. Claudio and Cecília sitting on the roof of the shared house they lived in for a year. On the back, a dedication in her handwriting. "I'll come back when I know if it's love, or just longing." Claudio trembled. That photo was theirs, no doubt, but it had never been developed. It was taken with Cecília's analog camera on a cloudy day, and she had promised to develop it, then said the film was ruined. How could that image exist? And why now? Clarissa, uneasy, said she couldn't explain, that it was just a request, that he should let everything go, forget Cecília. But Claudio's heart started beating like it hadn't in a long time. Something was wrong. Something was alive. And maybe, just maybe, Cecília was too. That night, Claudio turned on every light in the house, pulled boxes from the closet, flipped through old diaries, searched for forgotten notes. Clues were everywhere. Hidden reminders, metaphors that now sounded like coded confessions. Phrases like, "I'd rather disappear than watch you slowly forget me," or, "Maybe the only way to know if someone loves you is to see what they do when you're no longer around." It was as if she had written her own disappearance months in advance, and only now was he understanding. Every letter she left behind wasn't a farewell. It was a provocation, an invitation, a test. Cecília knew him better than anyone. She knew he wouldn't just accept it. She knew he'd dive into the depths of pain to find her. And maybe that's exactly what she wanted. The next day, Claudio bought a one-way ticket to a coastal town she had only mentioned a few times. Caravelas, a small, hidden place, almost poetic. It was where her mother had been born. It was where she said she wanted to vanish from the world and sell coffee in a place where no one knew her name. Claudio left without telling anyone. He took only the photo, the letters, and one burning question that ached in his chest like a fever. If she was alive, why did he still love her so much? The soft sound of a needle scratching vinyl echoed through the room, while the golden light of sunset spilled through the old windows like honey. The camera panned in slow motion, revealing Cecília lying on an embroidered quilt, eyes closed, hair spread out like paint across the pillow. Claudio sat on the floor, resting his head on her leg, scribbling something in a notebook. It was the pure image of peace, a magical bubble where time didn't enter, where pain had no place yet. It was there, in that tiny apartment in the university neighborhood, that their love took shape with an overwhelming intensity, as if they were determined to live in 6 months, what many don't experience in 6 decades. Cecília studied visual arts, but spoke like someone who had lived 1,000 lives. She was intense, electric, sarcastic. She collected hardcover books, loved old films, and had a laugh that always seemed on the verge of scandal. Claudio, on the other hand, was the opposite. He studied architecture, spoke little, observed a lot, and lived in constant conflict with his own shyness. It was precisely that difference that drew them together. He was enchanted by everything she was, and he couldn't be. She admired him for his calm, for the way he saw beauty in the ordinary, for the phrases he dropped out of nowhere like quiet revelations. Their first kiss happened under an awning, on a day when it rained too much to pretend they were just friends. She had forgotten her umbrella. He offered his jacket, and when their eyes met, there was no turning back. It was as if they had been waiting for that moment for a long time, as if they had rehearsed it in other lives. After that, they dove headfirst into each other. It was months of unbearable and delicious intensity. Sleepless nights watching French films, notes hidden in books, breakfasts on a makeshift wooden crate balcony, mirror declarations written in lipstick, whispered promises in the middle of the night. Claudio secretly filmed Cecília dancing around the house, saying he'd show the videos to their kids one day. Cecília, in turn, created artwork inspired by him. Paintings, collages, even a photo series called Invisible, where she captured Claudio always from behind, as if saying he was her silent muse. But what most defined that phase was the way they belonged to each other without fear. There were no games, no masks. They gave themselves to one another with rare, almost childlike courage. They made plans to travel the world, open a bookstore cafe in Parody, live in a village in Greece, write books together. It was movie love, book love, mad love, and it was real. Cecília used to say Claudio was the only man she could picture growing old, complaining about his bones but still smiling with his eyes. He promised that if she ever disappeared, he would move the entire world to find her, even if just to see her one more time. And she'd reply, "Don't say that, because I might actually test you." They laughed. They thought it was a joke. But now, looking back, maybe it had all been written already. One of Claudio's most vivid memories was the day they went to the Caravellas lighthouse. Cecília had insisted on spending a weekend there, even without money. They slept in the car, ate bread with butter, and shared a cheap wine under the stars. That night, under that clear sky, she asked, "If I died someday, would you really know if it was true?" He laughed, nervous, said she was crazy. But she didn't laugh. She just looked at him with an almost painful intensity. "It's just that sometimes, disappearing is the only way to know if someone would actually stay." Claudio didn't answer. But now, years later, those words echoed back as prophecies, as foreshadowings of a fate mapped out long ago. The memory of that lighthouse, her laughter carried by the wind, the way she pulled him to dance barefoot on the wet rocks. It all returned now, tasting like grief and longing. The flashback ends with the two of them hugging in a hammock, while Cecília whispers, "Promise you'll look for me, even if the whole world says I'm not here anymore?" And he answers without hesitation, "I promise." She closes her eyes and smiles, as if that was all she needed. The strongest love in the world doesn't survive when fear starts speaking louder than affection. And that's how, despite all the promises, despite all those Sundays under shared blankets and the countless bar napkin letters, Claudio and Cecília's love began to rot in silence. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, like a crack no one sees until it grows big enough to collapse everything that once seemed unshakable. What used to be passion turned into surveillance. What used to be freedom became control. And what once was surrender became punishment. Cecília began to pull away, not physically, but emotionally. She spent more time at the studio, avoided quick replies, started laughing less. Claudio noticed everything but pretended not to. He preferred to believe it was just college stress, the pile of projects, the weight of the artistic world she always carried in her chest. But deep down, he knew. She was disconnecting from him, and it terrified him. Claudio didn't know how to deal with the possibility of losing her, because Cecília wasn't just the woman he loved. She was the only thing in his life that still made sense. That's when jealousy was born. A voracious, corrosive jealousy, silent at first, but that soon took shape in accusations. Claudio began to suspect her studio mates, the messages she received, the work she did behind closed doors. He searched through her notebooks, read old conversations, showed up unannounced at campus. And Cecília, who always saw freedom as an extension of her own body, began to wither. "Do you want to love me or cage me?" she asked one night, after another argument about a friend who had complimented her online. Claudio replied, "I just want to know if you still choose me." But that wasn't the right question. Love doesn't survive on tests, and Cecília was tired of justifying every step she took. She wanted to be seen with trust, not suspicion, admired, not watched. She wanted to live a love that freed her, not one that swallowed her whole. And the more she tried to breathe, the tighter Claudio clung, convinced she was cheating. Until one night, after going through her computer in search of imaginary proof of betrayal, Claudio found something else. A folder full of photos of him, unsent letters, videos she had secretly recorded while he slept, whispering "I love you," like a prayer for no one. He cried when he saw it, but he didn't tell her. And still, the next day they fought over something stupid. A t-shirt he swore wasn't his. That was the final straw. Cecília looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let a single one fall. She just said, "You don't love me. You're afraid of me." And she walked out, left the key on the table in a silence as heavy as concrete. Claudio waited for her to come back that night, and the next, and all that week. But Cecília never came back. She called just once, days later. Her voice cold, distant, like she was already somewhere else, maybe even someone else. "Don't try to find me. I need to disappear from you before I disappear from myself." And she hung up. That was the beginning of hell. Claudio stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped existing. He spent his nights rewatching old videos, rereading notes, searching for signs of the exact moment she slipped through his fingers. But the truth was brutal. He had pushed her, out of fear, out of insecurity, out of loving too much, or not knowing how to love at all. Months later, when the letter came saying Cecília was sick and didn't want him to see her fade, Claudio didn't have the strength to question it. He just cried and accepted it. Because deep down, part of him believed he deserved it. That her absence was the only fair punishment. That dying to her, even symbolically, was the price for not knowing how to hold her gently. But what he didn't know was that the pain was only beginning. Because if one day Cecília ever decided to come back, it wouldn't be with an apology. It would be with a question: "Do you still love me enough to forgive me for everything?" After Cecília left, the house they once called home became a mausoleum of memories. Every corner whispered her name. The cracked mug on the dish rack, the slippers abandoned behind the couch, the paintbrush marks left on the wooden table. Everything was her. Everything pulsed in silence, as if absence had become an unbearable presence. Claudio didn't have the courage to touch anything. For weeks the bed remained untouched. The books stayed in the order she had left them, and the kitchen calendar still marked the last day she had been there. October 7th. It was as if freezing the space could stop time. But time doesn't respect the grieving. He stopped going out, stopped answering calls, returned the key to the office where he interned. His friends drifted away, not out of cruelty, but because no one knew what to say anymore. Claudio became a shadow of himself. He wandered around the house in old t-shirts, unshaven, eyes fixed in a gaze that mixed rage, guilt, and longing. The world outside kept spinning, indifferent. But inside him, everything had come to a halt. Cecília had left with a letter and an absence. News of her illness spread through the university halls, carried by Clarissa, who claimed she was handling Cecília's final matters. No one saw a body. No one confirmed a hospital. They just accepted it. After all, who would have the courage to doubt a death like that? Claudio accepted it too, not because he truly believed it, but because it was less painful to think she had died than to admit she chose to live far from him, in silence. What no one knew was that he wrote, every single day, long letters filled with desperation, confessions, and memories. He wrote as if there was still someone to read. He wrote about the weather, the films he rewatched, the poems she had left scribbled in her notebooks, the dreams where she appeared in a blue dress, smiling at him on a train platform. He placed the letters in envelopes, wrote "To Cecília," and stored them in a wooden box she had decorated with magazine clippings and quotes by Clarice Lispector. Their dog, Carlinhos, felt it too. Ever since Cecília left, he refused to eat properly, spent his days lying on the doormat, waiting for a return that never came. From time to time, he howled toward the hallway, as if hearing footsteps. Claudio would sit beside him and whisper, "She's not dead, Carlinhos. She just hid." But no one believed him. Not even Claudio, when lucidity caught him off guard in the middle of the night. His mind drifted between faith and despair. Between thinking Cecília was alive, plotting some strange plan like in the movies she loved, and accepting that she had simply gone, taking with her the last spark of his life. Clarissa visited a few times. She brought food, tried to talk, but always left more silent than she had arrived. She saw what Claudio couldn't, that he wasn't living through grief. He was living inside it. And that emptiness wasn't just the absence of Cecília, but the absence of himself. It was on one of those hopeless nights that Claudio, while reorganizing the letters in the box, found one he didn't remember writing. The paper was different, thicker. The envelope had a small detail he knew well, a hand-drawn anchor. Cecília used to sketch those when she was anxious. She always said she needed something to anchor her to the world. He opened the letter with trembling hands. It wasn't signed, but the message read, "If the love is real, it survives even absence. Don't look for me now. Only look for me if one day you stop trying to forget." In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't hope. It was unrest. A spark of doubt. A new pain. Because he realized that maybe, just maybe, Cecília wasn't dead. And if she wasn't, what did that say about their love? And what was he supposed to do with everything he still felt? The next morning, Claudio got up earlier than usual, took a shower, tore down the moldy curtain in the living room and let the light in. The dog barked, excited. He made coffee, and as he glanced at the old photo of them on the shelf, he murmured, "If you're alive, Cecília, I'm going to find you." The first letter was sent that same day, addressed to Caravelas, without knowing if she was still there, without knowing if she would read it, but with one clear certainty. He needed to know whether she had left him, or was still waiting to be found. Clarissa had always been the parallel figure in Claudio and Cecília's story, never the protagonist, but present enough to carry the weight of someone who witnessed everything unfold. From the early days of their relationship, she had been there. Cecília's childhood friend, almost a sister by bond, someone who knew her traumas, her deepest fears, the scars no one else had access to. Claudio, though suspicious of her at times, never had the courage to say what he felt. That Clarissa was a constant shadow in their relationship, always watching, always a little too close. When Cecília disappeared and Clarissa took on the role of grief's messenger, something inside Claudio twisted. She showed up at his house with red eyes, speaking softly, as if bearing the weight of news long postponed. "She left in peace, Claudinho," she said, calling him by a name no one else used. And even without proof, no certificate, no burial site, no voice cracking with truth, she was convincing, and Claudio, shattered, didn't have the strength to question her. But now, months later, with the growing suspicion that Cecília might still be alive, everything about Clarissa seemed fake. Her overly calculated gestures, her carefully chosen words, her rehearsed silence. Claudio decided to confront her, without warning. He knocked on her apartment door on a rainy night, as if hoping the water might wash away the lies along with the street. Clarissa opened with a surprised expression, but said nothing. She simply stepped aside. The house was soaked in a yellowish gloom, as if time had also stopped there. Old photos, books on behavioral psychology, scented candles, and a lingering smell of lavender. The same scent Cecília used. Claudio didn't speak at first. He just looked around, trying to pick up signs, clues, anything that would confirm what his heart already screamed. Clarissa served tea, sat on the couch, legs crossed, the way she always did when uncomfortable. "You still think about her every day, don't you?" she asked. He responded only with a sharp, direct look, then pulled the anchor letter from his pocket and dropped it on the table. "Do you know what this is?" he asked without flinching. Clarissa froze for a second, just 1 second, but it was enough. She averted her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Claudio, sometimes we do things to protect the ones we love." The phrase landed like thunder between them. He stood up, tense, as if beginning to piece together truths he hadn't wanted to face. "She's alive, isn't she?" he said. "You helped her disappear." Clarissa remained silent. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. She simply stood and walked to a shelf hidden by fabric curtains. From it, she pulled a dented metal box, old, with colorful stickers on it. Claudio recognized it immediately. It was Cecília's, the one she used to store project drafts. Clarissa placed it on the table and said, "She asked me to keep this." Said if you were ever ready, I'd know when to give it back. Claudio opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were Polaroids, notes, a map of Caravellas with pen markings, handwritten quotes of things he had said, as if turned into prayers, a cassette labeled with his name, and a navy blue notebook with a single phrase on the cover. True love survives even the lie. Clarissa sat beside him and, for the first time, spoke without looking away. She loved you more than you can imagine, but she also feared you. She said she needed to know if you loved her, or just needed her to fill your own emptiness. Faking her death was the only way she found to see your reaction without influencing the answer. Claudio felt betrayed, ridiculed, manipulated. But at the same time, something within him, a part that had never died, pulsed violently. Cecília was alive, and more than that, she was watching him, from afar, in silence, like a ghost of their own love. She's in Caravellas, isn't she? He asked. Clarissa hesitated, then nodded. She works at a cafe, but changed her name. If you go there, you'll have to recognize her without her revealing herself. It's the last test, the cruelest one. Claudio stood, took the box, thanked her with a dry nod, and before leaving, heard Clarissa say, "If you still love her, go, but go prepared, because the love you find may not be the same one you lost." He left, without looking back. The wind hit hard, his heart harder. It was time to find out if his mourning was real, or just part of a theater crafted by a woman who, even absent, still knew exactly where he hurt. The road to Caravellas felt endless, as if destiny itself were testing Claudio's determination with every curve, every sudden rainfall, every ghost station he passed. He couldn't remember the last time he had driven so long without a clear route in his mind. Only Cecilia's scribbled map and the metal box resting on the passenger seat, like a sacred reliquary. Every kilometer was a step further out of the grave he had buried himself in after she disappeared. And at the same time, each kilometer was an emotional roulette. What if it was all a misunderstanding? What if she really was dead? Or worse, what if she was alive but different, distant, unrecognizable? Caravellas was a small town, tucked between rocky cliffs and deserted beaches, with an old lighthouse atop a hill and cobblestone streets that seemed plucked from a forgotten storybook. Claudio arrived in the early afternoon, his face damp, eyes heavy, and heart pounding like a furious drum. He parked in the town square and wandered aimlessly, observing faces, cafes, details. In his mind, Cecília could be around any corner. At any moment, he could run into her. But nothing happened. He decided to stay at a rustic inn called Casa do Horizonte, where the receptionist, a kind lady named Selena, greeted him with a strange familiarity, as if she had been expecting him. "Your name is Claudio, isn't it? We have a room reserved with a view of the lighthouse." His eyes widened, surprised. She smiled, offering no explanation, just handed him the key and pointed to a creaky wooden staircase. In the room, he placed Cecilia's box on the desk and sat by the window. The lighthouse was indeed visible from there, and for a moment he wondered, had she seen him from up there? Was he being watched? He picked up the navy blue notebook and reread her notes, each line scratched as if it were a clue in an emotional labyrinth. And then, at the bottom of the box, he found a photograph folded in four. He opened it carefully. His hands trembled. It was her, or at least, it looked like her. In the photo, a woman who closely resembled Cecília, with slightly shorter dark brown hair, wore a beige apron embroidered with the name Clara. She was holding a tray with 2 cups and smiling at someone out of frame. Behind her, a colorful wall with old movie posters, just like Cecília always imagined for her dream cafe. The image looked recent, and in the corner, a date, August 12th. Claudio nearly dropped the photo. His whole body tingled. He turned it over and found a tiny hand-drawn symbol, the anchor. Again, the same stroke, the same silent signature of Cecília. Was it an invitation or a provocation? Did she want to be found? Or did she just want to see how far he would go? Either way, it was far too late to turn back. He walked the streets of Caravellas like a hunter. He wandered through bakeries, markets, florists, but avoided asking directly, afraid of sounding crazy. Until, near dusk, guided by an almost animal instinct, his steps led him to an alley decorated with murals and hanging flower pots. At the end stood a charming cafe with a sign that read, Cinematografico. It was the place from the photo, her place. Claudio stood before the door, trying to steady his breath, trying to find some rational explanation for all of it. But reason hadn't worked in a long time. He stepped in. A bell jingled overhead, and there she was, behind the counter, back turned, arranging cups, as if it were just another ordinary day. He froze. The world slowed down. The sounds of the street vanished. Only his breathing remained, heavy, uneven, and the soft clink of the spoon in her hand. Cecília, or Clara, turned slowly, sensing his presence. She looked at him for 1 second, and in that second, the entire universe collapsed. Their eyes met. She said nothing, didn't smile, but neither was she startled. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time, and yet didn't know how to react now that it had finally come. Claudio took a step forward, tried to say something, but his voice failed. Cecília looked at him with teary eyes and an expression that mixed love, fear, and a silent plea for forgiveness. "Good afternoon," she said, as if he were a stranger. Claudio simply replied, "Are you real?" And in that moment, more than ever, he realized the search wasn't over. The search had only just begun. The distance between them was only a few meters. But for Claudio, it felt like crossing an abyss. Cecília, or Clara as she now called herself, remained behind the counter, eyes fixed on him, body tense, as if ready to flee. Claudio took another step, just one, and that was enough for her to turn back to the cups, masking her rapid breathing and the tremor in her fingers. He recognized that gesture, the way she tidied things when she was nervous, the way her gaze drifted, not out of fear, but out of self-defense. Claudio wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand answers. But in that small cafe lit by warm yellow light and decorated with portraits of Audrey Hepburn and Truffaut, time seemed suspended, and the only certainty was the doubt lingering in the air like a familiar and uncomfortable perfume. "Have you worked here long?" he asked in an almost casual tone. Cecília didn't look back. She only replied in a polite whisper, "Since the beginning of the year." Her voice was still the same, soft, melodic, with the perfect pause between words. But now it came wrapped in caution, as if every syllable wore armor. Claudio pretended to read the menu, but his eyes never left her. "Any recommendations?" he pressed, trying to provoke something. Cecília hesitated. "The cinnamon cappuccino is the most popular." And then she looked up. For 1 second, a full second, and Claudio felt it all collapse again. Because her gaze was a confession the entire world couldn't deny. It was her. It was Cecília. The woman he had buried in letters, in grief, in despair. And now she was there, wearing an apron, with a new name, pretending to be someone else. He sat down, facing the counter, as if refusing to play along. "You look a lot like someone I used to know," he said. She gave a brief, nervous smile. "I get that sometimes." Then turned around to the coffee machine. Her shoulders trembled. The spoon fell to the floor. Claudio closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the weight of absurdity, the chill of twisted reality. He was standing in front of the woman he loved and couldn't touch her, couldn't call her by name, couldn't mourn her. While she prepared the coffee, he observed every move, the same delicate gestures, her habit of humming softly when she thought she was alone, the careful attention to details. It was impossible to deny, but it was also impossible to confront her. Not yet. This wasn't a reunion. It was a game, and Claudio sensed the rules were still unclear. She returned with the cup. "Here you go," she said, placing it in front of him with trembling hands. Claudio gently took her wrist, not with force, just presence. Cecília froze, and he said in a low voice, "If you say you don't know me, I'll leave. But if you say, 'See you soon,' I'll wait, as long as it takes." She looked into his eyes, and in that instant, Claudio saw something in hers. Pain, love, anger, fear. All the emotions that lived between who they were and who they no longer knew if they could be. Cecília pulled her arm back slowly, as if protecting herself without hurting him, and replied, her voice trembling, "Sorry, you must be mistaken." Claudio smiled, not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who recognized a temporary defeat. "Of course. Sorry to bother you." He took the cup, brought it to his lips, and tasted something he hadn't tasted in years. The same cinnamon coffee she used to make on cold mornings. The memory burned his throat more than the heat of the drink. He stood up, looked at her one last time, and walked out without turning back. But he left something on the counter. A folded letter, addressed to C. Just that, a single letter. an invitation for silence to start speaking. Cecilia didn't touch the letter until the cafe was empty. She took it to the back room, sat on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. As she read, the tears came without warning. The letter said, "You died to the world, but you still live in me. I'm not here to accuse you, but to know if one day you'll return, or if now, I'm the one who has to leave." And for the first time in months, Cecilia cried out loud, not for the pain of the lie, but for the fear of the truth. Claudio left the cafe without looking back, but every step through the streets of Caravelas felt like a dagger to his memory. The scent of cinnamon still clung to his senses, mixed with the bittersweet feeling of having found, and at the same time lost again, the love of his life. The woman who served the coffee was Cecilia. There was no doubt left. He knew the way she blinked slowly when trying to hide emotion. He knew the subtle movement of her hands, the tilt of her head when saying something she didn't believe. It was her, behind the persona of Clara. But why keep playing the game? Why sustain the lie? Claudio didn't know. And that was exactly what started to eat him alive. With each passing day, he felt his sanity measured by the thin thread between waiting and acting. And Claudio was made for action. When something didn't make sense, he had to investigate, had to piece it together. Above all, he had to understand. That's why, in the days that followed, he turned his stay in Caravelas into a quiet mission. He rented an old bicycle and wandered through the town like any other tourist. But behind the sunglasses and polite smile was a sentimental detective, searching for breadcrumbs left by a woman pretending not to be herself. He found out where she lived. A small wooden house, discreet, facing a dune. Simple but charming. Plants in the window, pale blue curtains, the same color as the bedsheet they used back in the shared house. It was just a few blocks from the cafe. Claudio watched from a distance, sitting on a bench in the square, pretending to read the local newspaper, where he sometimes found handwritten ads by Cecilia, under the name Clara, inviting people to film screenings at the cafe. It was her. Even the directors she referenced matched: Kieslowski, Bergman, Wong Kar-wai. On the third night, after the lights in the house went out, Claudio approached. Not to invade, not yet, but to feel the place. He ran his fingers over the wooden fence, where he saw scribbled in black pen a small anchor, the symbol again. It was like she wanted to be found, and at the same time, punish whoever found her. It was torture, and that ambiguity made Claudio feel, every second, like he was one breath away from madness. And then temptation overcame caution. One rainy afternoon, while Cecilia was at the cafe, Claudio knew he'd been watching. He walked to her house with determined steps. The back door was just ajar. He hesitated, but entered. The rooms were small, minimalist, but carried her fingerprints on everything. The paintings on the walls, the books on the table, poetic notes stuck to the fridge. Claudio walked like someone stepping through sacred ruins, until he saw, in the corner of the room, a box with his name. Claudio, handwritten, in trembling letters. Inside the box were all the letters he had written and sent to the address he thought was fictional. She had received them all, read them all. Some were opened, others still sealed, but stained with tears or coffee. There was also a diary, a black-covered notebook. Claudio opened it with the care of someone holding a soul. And there it was, the truth. Cecilia had narrated her disappearance. The days after her death, the pain she felt watching him suffer, the guilt tangled with anger, the relief at still being loved, and the fear of being hated when found. One page stood out. It had only one question, written in capital letters. If he knows the truth, will he love me or kill me? Claudio closed the notebook tightly. His heart raced. He was caught in a whirlwind where love and hate danced arm in arm. He felt betrayed and loved, angry at having been manipulated, but fiercely in love knowing she never forgot him. It was insane, but so was he. Insane for still loving her, for still calling her mine, for still wanting to hold her, after everything. Before leaving, he saw a cassette tape on the table, his name written in her handwriting. He took it, and left the same way he came, without making a sound. That night, in his room at the inn, he played the tape. It was Cecilia's voice. If you're hearing this, it's because you found me. I don't know if I can look you in the eyes right now, but I know you're the only person in the world who could still recognize me. And if you made it this far, it's because you still love me, or want to destroy me. Maybe both. She breathed deeply, then continued. Claudio, I faked my death because I couldn't bear to be invisible to you while alive. The tape ended, and Claudio cried, but not like before. This time it wasn't mourning. It was something deeper. It was the birth of the cruelest doubt of all. What if loving someone meant never being able to trust them again? The night arrived heavy, without wind, as if the world were holding its breath for what was about to come. Claudio was alone in the inn room, surrounded by fragments of a love that insisted on resurrecting itself even after being buried alive. The cassette tape still spun in silence, the residual static echoing like a lament trapped between the walls. But he knew there was more. That voice, Cecilia's voice, steady, cracked, real, was only the beginning. There were hidden truths waiting to be revealed, and he was ready, or at least, he wanted to believe he was. Inside the box he found at her house, among the letters and the diary, there was also an old flash drive, taped to the underside of the lid. Claudio had overlooked it in the rush to absorb the confession on paper. But now, with his heart more restless than ever, he plugged it into the old laptop he always carried. The screen flickered. A single file appeared. Final confession move. He clicked. The image stuttered for a second before stabilizing. Cecília appeared on screen, sitting in front of the camera, wearing one of his shirts, navy blue, with a small anchor on the chest. Her hair tied up messily, her face bare, no makeup, but with deep circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. She looked exhausted, but there was a strange calm in her eyes, as if this were something she had postponed for far too long. If you're watching this, it's because you found me, or because Clarissa showed you, or maybe because you broke into my house, which wouldn't surprise me at all, she said with a short, almost cynical smile. Anyway, if you've made it this far, I think you deserve to know the truth, or at least my version of it. She took a deep breath and began. Claudio, I loved you with everything I had, from that stupid day in photography class, from the first coffee, the first fight, the first silence. I loved you when you didn't deserve it, when you pushed me away, when you held me too tightly, and also when you looked at me like I was everything, and maybe I was, but you didn't know what to do with that everything. She paused for a few seconds, wiped her face, came back. You suffocated me, Claudio, not because you were cruel, but because you were scared, and your fear became my prison. I saw myself through your eyes, and I started to hate myself. I thought it was my fault, that I was provoking the jealousy, that I needed to shut up, change, reshape myself, until one day I realized it didn't matter. Even if I turned to stone, you'd still think I wanted to escape. The tears started to fall, but her voice stayed firm. So I ran, but not like everyone else. I didn't want to leave you. I wanted to show you, to test you. I wanted to know if, without me, you'd still look for me. If you loved me for who I was, or for the void I filled. Was it selfish? Yes. Was it cruel? Maybe. But it was honest. I needed to know, because deep down, I was scared too. Scared to come back and be nothing more than a memory. Scared of being replaced by some Katerina, the kind that smiles easily and doesn't complicate everything. She laughed, bitterly. I made up the illness, the letter, asked Clarissa for help. I hid. I created Clara. I invented a life. I thought it would last weeks, a few months at most. But then you wrote. You wrote like I was still there, like I had never left. And each letter was a punch to the stomach, because in them, I saw you loving me more than you ever did in life. She swallowed hard, and for the first time, her voice broke. I wanted to come back, Claudio, so many times. But then I'd think, what if seeing me alive kills the magic? What if grief made you idealize a Cecília that I'm not anymore? What if you only love absence, not presence? The camera trembled. She leaned in. Her face filled the screen. Red eyes, tears now pouring. If you love me, truly, don't forgive me. Face me, hate me, curse me. But listen, see me, and choose. Because I no longer know who I am without you. But I also don't want to be loved by someone who only loves who I was. End of video. The screen went black. Claudio sat still, face soaked in sweat and tears. No words, no coherent thoughts, just the truth. Raw, hard, devastating, filling every inch of space inside him. She wasn't dead. She was asking to live, with him, or without him. But now, the choice was his, and the time for running was over. The sky dawned in a strange hue, a bluish gray, diffuse, as if nature itself already knew that today was the day when past and present would crash head-on. Claudio walked through the streets of Caravelas with heavy, yet unwavering steps. The box of letters had been left behind. The flash drive and the video, however, he carried in his pocket like someone who holds both a weapon and an answer. The truth no longer weighed on him. It burned. It was impossible to ignore. Cecília had faked her own death, disappeared, reinvented herself, but she had never forgotten him. And now, after all the pain, the doubt, the anger, and the longing, he needed to face her, no longer as a grieving man writing letters to a ghost, but as a betrayed man who still loves. The cafe was empty that late morning. The usual customers hadn't yet arrived. Cecília, Clara, for the unaware, arranged the tables with distracted delicacy. The dark circles under her eyes revealed sleepless nights, a soul in torment, the fear of the moment she knew would come. Because deep down, she had always known. Claudio was not a man who left questions unanswered. And now, he stood there, in the doorway, silent, unmoving. Like the storm that comes after the wind has gone quiet, she saw him, and froze. Her hand still held a napkin, torn in two without her even noticing. Claudio took 3 slow steps. The door closed behind him with a sharp click. There was no more escape. "We need to talk," he said. Cecília took a deep breath, nodded, and walked toward him. They stopped face to face, like soldiers in a battlefield. No touch, no smile, just eyes locked on each other, and the abyss between them screaming with everything lost, hidden, manipulated. "You watched the video," she whispered. Claudio nodded. "I did, and for a while I thought I was losing my mind. But no, you're real. The lie was real. The love, I don't know anymore." Cecília bit her lower lip. Tears began to rise, but she held them back. She knew she no longer had the right to cry before him. "I needed to know, Claudio. I needed to see if you loved me. Not just as a mirror for your emptiness," she said, almost pleading. "So you chose to destroy me to find out," he replied. "You killed a version of me just to see what was left. And what remained, Cecília, was pain, anger, grief. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend nights talking to nothing, writing letters to a grave with no body, smelling someone you believed was decomposing beneath the earth?" She tried to speak, but he raised his hand. "Don't interrupt. I need to say this." Claudio's voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I loved you more than I should have. I turned you into an altar, and maybe that hurt you more than any betrayal. But you were cruel, because you did all this knowing I'd come, knowing I'd find you. And when you saw me there, standing in your cafe, you pretended I was a stranger." "It was fear," she whispered, eyes glassy. "It was cowardice," he corrected. "And cowardice is the opposite of love." Cecília stepped back, as if struck, and maybe she had been, but she didn't flee. She stayed there, exposed, hurt, authentic, for the first time, with no excuses, no shields. "I still love you, Claudio," she said. "Even now. Even knowing you might hate me for the rest of your life." He looked at her with such deep pain it barely fit in his chest. "I don't hate you, Cecília. I just don't know if I can still love you without hating myself too." Silence followed, dense, breathless. She cried. He just stared at the wall, trying not to sink into the past, trying to understand if love could survive the truth, trying to know whether forgiveness was a choice or a consequence. He walked toward her, slowly, stopped very close, touched her face like someone touching something sacred and broken at once, and asked, "Would you die for me?" She didn't hesitate. "I would." "Then why did you choose to live without me?" She closed her eyes and answered, "Because I needed to live with myself first." Claudio lowered his head, took a deep breath, and then smiled. A short smile, painful, real. "For the first time, you told me the truth." And he walked out, without promising to return. Without saying goodbye, leaving behind a woman in pieces, and a story that, perhaps, was not yet over. The cafe door closed with the dry sound of a decision, not out of anger, but of ending. A real ending. A clean cut after a blind surgery. Cecília remained still, her palms flat on the counter, as if trying to hold on to the last piece of solid ground. Outside, Claudio vanished down the cobbled street like a ghost from the past being swallowed by the present. She didn't run after him, didn't scream, didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply let him go. Because in that moment, silence said more than any plea ever could. Cecília collapsed to her knees right there. The cafe floor was cold, but not colder than the void opening inside her. It wasn't the sobbing of a regretful woman. It was the collapse of someone who had taken an emotional game too far. and finally realized the cost of playing with the feelings of a man who only knew how to love with visceral intensity. Claudio had touched her one last time, touched her face like someone touching a fading memory, and then he left. That wasn't a pause. It was rejection. Clear, cruel, final. While she unraveled, the letter he had left before their first conversation was still hidden under the coffee machine. She retrieved it, reopened it, read it again. The words were simple, almost childlike. If you're still there, I'll wait. But if you're not you anymore, then this is goodbye, for everything we were. Cecilia crumpled the paper against her chest. That was it. He no longer wanted the woman she had become, Clara, and maybe not even the Cecilia she once was, because there's a limit to how much love can survive on memory alone, and she had crossed it. Elsewhere in the city, Claudio drove aimlessly along the road by the sea, his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind dulled by truth. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He didn't pound the steering wheel like in the movies. The grief being born now was colder, more lucid, more mature. It was the kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just stays, like a pebble in the soul's shoe. Back at the inn, he gathered his few belongings. The box of letters, the blue-covered notebook, the flash drive with the video. He packed everything slowly, reverently, like relics that now belonged to the past. The innkeeper, Selina, watched him with wise eyes, like someone who had seen this kind of love die before. "Are you leaving?" she asked gently. "I'm continuing," he replied without bitterness, because staying would be living a lie on loop. She nodded. No more words. She understood. Sometimes, truly loving someone means knowing when to let go. And Claudio was leaving not out of a lack of feeling, but out of respect for his own pain. Cecilia had tested the limits of their love, and in the end she got the answer she feared most. Yes, he loved her, but not more than he loved himself. That night, as the lights of Caravellas went out one by one, Cecilia walked to the lighthouse. She climbed every step like carrying a cross. From the top, she looked out at the vast, dark sea and wondered if that love could ever be reborn. She knew he still loved her, but what remained now was a Cecilia patched with guilt and holes torn by her own hands. And to love someone like that required more than passion. It required forgiveness, and that she didn't know if Claudio could ever give. She sat on the edge of the railing and wrote something on a piece of paper. Carefully folding it, she placed it inside a bottle and cast it into the sea. If fate wills it, this letter will find you. And if time is kind to us, maybe someday you'll read it with different eyes. That was all, a breath of hope in a storm of guilt. And then, silence. The sea took the bottle. The city fell asleep. And for the first time in years, Cecilia felt what Claudio had once felt. The unbearable weight of living in a world where the person you love the most has chosen to live without you. Days had passed since Claudio left Caravellas, and time began to take on a strange texture. The hours no longer rushed by. They dragged, as if reality had lost its urgency after that goodbye. He returned to his city with a light suitcase, but a body heavier than ever. He hadn't told anyone where he had gone or why he had disappeared, and when he came back, he didn't explain either. People respected his silence, but deep down, they felt something inside that man had changed irreversibly. Claudio tried to reintegrate into life. He started with small gestures, returned to the neighborhood bakery, renovated the long-forgotten porch, cleaned the room where Cecilia used to stay when she spent the night with him, a kind of silent closure ritual. He donated old clothes, locked her letters in a box, and hid it deep inside his closet. But no matter how hard he tried to rationalize everything he had lived through, his heart still carried a pain he couldn't name. It wasn't longing, nor was it anger. It was a hybrid form of wounded love, one that still beats, but no longer blooms. Friends, little by little, started reaching out again. Cesar, his cousin who always encouraged him to reinvent himself, was the first to invite him for coffee. Claudio accepted, spoke little, laughed even less. But the effort was genuine. In one of those conversations, Cesar introduced him to Caterina, a co-worker new to the city. She was different from Cecilia in every way. Practical, light, radiant. She had the gift of talking about simple things as if they were epic. A new song, a cake recipe, the color of the sky at dusk. At first, Claudio just listened politely, as someone respectfully trying to distract himself. But as the weeks went by, he started to take interest. Not out of love, but for relief. Caterina never invaded his space. never asked too many questions, and that was new. It felt like bathing in a calm river after surviving a storm at sea. They started seeing each other often. Coffees, walks, a movie here, a dinner there. Claudio laughed now and then, and for brief moments he forgot Cecília, not out of disrespect, but out of survival. Still, at night, the memories returned. Always. Just the pillow touching his face was enough. Just the silence of midnight. Just the sound of an old song echoing down the street. He still thought about her, about how she looked at him during that final conversation, about how she begged to be seen, about how she lied to be loved. Sometimes, Claudio would wake up wanting to go back, to reopen wounds, but he would breathe deeply, glance at the locked wardrobe, and remember, loving someone also means knowing when to stop bleeding for them. One day, while organizing old boxes in the house's storage room, Claudio found an old camcorder, the kind he used when he was a student. He turned it on out of curiosity. There was a forgotten tape inside, and when he played it, he saw an old recording. Cecília dancing around the living room in colorful socks and a light dress, holding a book and doing funny voices to perform poetry. It was a version of her he hadn't seen in a long time. Free, silly, happy. The camera shook from his laughter behind it, and in those few minutes, Claudio cried again. Not because he wanted to go back, but because he finally understood that Cecília really was gone. The woman he found in Caravellas was someone else, a wounded, changed version of her who had chosen to hide from the world to survive. And he was someone else too, more skeptical, more silent, more selective about what he dared call love. At the end of the tape, Cecília leaned into the camera and whispered, "If one day you forget who I am, remember who we were. Maybe that will save you." Claudio closed the camcorder, and in that moment, he knew that although he was no longer waiting for her, there was still no room for anyone else while that memory lived so vividly. Caterina was kind, she was good, but she was presence in a heart still occupied by absence. And love, Claudio had learned the cruelest way, cannot be split in halves. It's either whole or it's a lie. Life seemed to have settled into a quiet cadence. The days began to repeat themselves with the predictability of old clocks. Wake up, work, pretend everything is fine, sleep. Claudio had learned to move through this routine like someone walking on gravel, with a certain ache, but no longer bleeding. Caterina still showed up from time to time, always respectful, always light. He, grateful, tried to respond to the peace she offered, but a part of him, the deepest part, remained inaccessible, locked, untouched. A territory where only one name echoed: Cecília. It was on a warm, windless afternoon that the final piece of the puzzle arrived. A brown envelope, yellowed by time, with no sender, appeared in his mailbox. Claudio nearly ignored it, thinking it was just another bill or some flyer. But when he turned it over, he saw a small, hand-drawn symbol, the anchor. It made his heart skip a beat. He opened the envelope right there on the sidewalk, his fingers trembling. Inside, a single handwritten page, her handwriting intact, recognizable, like a hug sent from far away. "Claudio, if this letter reached you, it means I finally had the courage to write without hiding. Maybe because I finally understood that love doesn't live on tests, and that love proven through pain ceases to be love. I ran, yes, from you, from myself, from the version of us that was destroying itself. I faked my death because dying felt easier than facing the mirror. I created Clara because Cecília was in ruins. And even watching you suffer, and God knows how much that broke me, I stayed in my play, because it was the only role that protected me from guilt." She went on, and her words struck like daggers and healed like balm. "All at once, when I saw you in that coffee shop, my world collapsed. It was like time folded in on itself. I wanted to run. I wanted to say, 'Forgive me,' but I no longer knew if it was Cecília or Clara standing there. And you didn't look at me the same. Your eyes had something new, a wall, and I realized that maybe you still loved me, but no longer recognized me." Claudio sat down on the sidewalk. The paper shook in his hands. People passed by, cars rolled on, the world kept spinning. But in that moment, all that existed was her. Again, I'm writing this not to ask you to come back, not even for forgiveness. I write because you deserve to know that despite everything, my love for you was never a lie. It was flawed, desperate, immature, but it was love. And if there's anything I can still offer you, it's one last choice. She then described the same place where years earlier, They had watched the sunset embraced for the first time. The lighthouse in Caravelas. The letter ended with a sentence that was more than an invitation. It was a final period disguised as a dash. If there's still any part of you that loves me, even just a trace, I'll be at the lighthouse, Saturday, at midnight. Alone. No lies, no script. Just me. Just you. Just the truth. But if you don't come, I'll understand. And I promise I'll never seek you again. She signed it with her full name. Not Clara. Not a symbol. But Cecília Cortés. The woman Claudio had cried for, loved, shouted at, and died a little inside for. The woman who now stripped away all disguises. He pressed the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. The doubt returned like a lightning bolt. To go or not to go. To give her a chance for a reunion, or to honor the path of healing he had fought so hard to build. Night came before he decided. But deep down, he already knew. Because no matter how much he tried to move on, Cecília was the only story his heart still couldn't abandon. And maybe, just maybe, the ending didn't have to be goodbye. Saturday arrived like an unsettling whisper, the kind that seems to repeat in your ear every minute what the heart still tries to avoid. Claudio spent the entire day in a state of suspension. He didn't eat, didn't read, didn't reply to messages. He just walked back and forth through the house, checking the clock with the anxiety of someone waiting for a verdict. Cecília's letter rested on the table like a bomb without a fuse. All it needed was a decision to detonate everything. At 6 p.m., the doubt started screaming louder than reason. If he went, it meant admitting that despite everything, something still pulsed. Even if it was only the need for closure. Something human, real, and dignified. If he didn't go, he would have to live with the eternal echo of what if. And Claudio knew that echo was crueler than any reunion. By 7 p.m., he was already in the car, parked outside the house, keys in hand and engine off. Caterina had messaged him that morning. "Good morning, Clau. I dreamed of you laughing." He didn't reply, not out of contempt for the gesture, but because he realized that wasn't the kind of peace he was looking for. There was something inside him that needed to be resolved before he could truly smile again. Not a borrowed smile, but a whole one. At 8 p.m., he began driving. The sky, once clear, started to close in, as if Caravelas were calling the rain back to purify its memories. He drove with glazed eyes, overtaking cars with urgency, hunger, desperation. The rain came, first in scattered drops, then in a thick curtain that made the headlights look like shards of light in an opaque ocean. But he didn't stop, because he knew that if he gave up now, he'd never have the courage to look back again. By 10 p.m., the coastal road curved beneath his tires, and the sea to the left was a dark mass roaring like it carried all the world's pain. Claudio drove faster. The rain slid down the windshield like the tears of a sky torn between love and pride. At 11 p.m., the car stopped at the base of the lighthouse trail. From there on, it was only on foot. Claudio stepped out, pulled on a worn jacket, and faced the wet stone steps. Each step was a challenge to his exhaustion, his hesitation, his fear. The lighthouse at the top blinked like a hesitant heart. 11:40 p.m. Claudio reached the top. The lighthouse door stood open. A strong wind pushed him as if warning, "You can still turn back." But he went in. The spiral staircase seemed endless. The smell of mold, salt, rust, all mixed with the memory of her. Her laughter, her improvised dances. That day she had looked at him and said, "This lighthouse will be our meeting point if life ever tears us apart." 11:58 p.m. Claudio reached the top, and she was there, alone, soaked, sitting on the inner ledge, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sky. No makeup, no smile, no tears, just breathing, as if waiting for fate, whatever it might be. He stopped at the door. "Cecília." She didn't turn immediately, but when she did, Claudio felt time freeze. She stood slowly, like someone returning from a long journey. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, there were no more lies, no more escape, no more versions. Only two people, two wrecked worlds trying to recognize each other. "You came," she whispered. He replied only with a look, then walked toward her. A meter away, he stopped, pulled the letter from his pocket, and said, "I came, because I realized love isn't what we built. It's what remained when everything fell apart." She stepped forward, eyes red, lips trembling. "And what remained, Claudio?" He took a long moment before answering. But when he did, it was with the raw truth, you. And she fell into his arms. And the lighthouse, in that instant, illuminated more than the raging sea. It lit up a new beginning. Not of the dreams they once created, but of a new story yet to be written. The night wrapped them in a cold embrace, but for the first time, neither of them felt alone. Claudio and Cecilia stayed there, at the top of the lighthouse, holding each other as if nothing else existed. Not the past, not the future, not even time, just the now. A heavy now, yes. Painful, yes, but still, true. They said nothing for long minutes, because there are silences that must be honored. And their bodies spoke a language no words could ever translate. It was the reunion of two broken souls who, even after everything, still knew the way back to each other. The rain kept falling outside, but inside them, something new began to grow. Small, fragile, but real. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was recognition. The mutual acceptance that yes, they had hurt each other, but had also loved with the rawest, most human kind of love. Claudio rested his forehead against hers. Cecilia's eyes still shimmered with tears, but there was a new light in them. A light that said, I'm not the same, but I'm still me. And Claudio, as he looked at her, saw something he had never seen before. Not the idealized woman he had lost, but the real woman who, though torn by her own choices, was still there, fully present in her vulnerability. They descended the lighthouse in silence. The town slept beneath the storm. The sea roared in the distance, like a witness to a love that had defied all conventions, even death itself. Cecilia walked slowly, as if every step was a rehearsal for a possible future. Claudio followed without haste, respecting her pace, her space. When they reached the car, he opened the door, but she hesitated. Can I ask you something? She said, her voice soft. He nodded. Let's walk, just tonight. Claudio understood. It was symbolic. They needed to step into reality together. No shortcuts, no escapes. They walked the wet road to her cottage, feet soaked, bodies exhausted, but their spirits calmer than in a long time. Inside, Cecilia turned on just a single warm light in the living room. The space looked exactly as Claudio remembered. Simple, full of details, marked by her presence. But now everything felt new, as if his eyes were seeing with a different lens, clearer, rawer, freed from expectation. She took off her coat, handed him a towel, and offered tea. Ordinary things, yet miracles in that moment. Life trying to happen again between two people who had lost each other, and themselves. They sat on the couch, close, but not too close. Cecilia stared into her mug like it was a mirror. I thought you'd never come, that the letter was too late. Claudio took time to reply. When he finally did, his voice was low, steady. I almost didn't come, but I realized that if I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened if we started over, for real, without lies, without demands, just with what was left. She looked him in the eye, hope and fear tangled in her gaze. And what was left, Claudio? He breathed in deeply. The will. The answer wasn't grand, but it was honest. And it was enough. That night they didn't make vows, didn't plan the future, didn't speak of forever. They fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder, with the sound of the rain filling the space between one heartbeat and the next. It was the beginning of something new, something that didn't need a label, because neither alive nor dead, they were reborn. The next morning, the sun rose for the first time in weeks, and with it, the silent promise that even with scars, even with cracks, love could still bloom in the most unlikely soil, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And somewhere out in the sea, a bottle drifted on. Inside, a letter that might never be read, or maybe would be found someday, by someone who also believed that true love never dies. It only begins again.